Okay, well, thanks. Welcome everyone. Just as a reminder, this meeting is recorded and it will be posted on our storyboard. So for you to be able to pass on to other members of the public if they have questions during the public comment period. So this will be recorded as well as the entirety of this presentation today will be recorded, and the presentation that we'll see in a minute. I just wanted to say hello, good evening. Just thank you all for joining us tonight. My name is Mila Kelly, and I, along with my colleague Allison Hendricks, are with DJ&A, an environmental and engineering consulting firm here in Montana. And for the past year, we've had the pleasure of supporting Butte-Silver in the development of the 2023 Community Wildfire Protection Plan. You're going to hear that term a lot this evening. CWPP is the acronym for that, which you'll hear numerous times. But before we dive into the plan itself, I would just like to take a moment and acknowledge the vision, the hard work, and the intense process that it took from Butte-Silver and the core team members whose names are on an upcoming slide, as well as support from the Montana Department of Natural Resources Community Preparedness and Wildfire Protection Group. So this process began over 2 years ago when Butte-Silver spearheaded with the vision of Jim Keenan to successfully develop a grant application to DNRC. This grant application was awarded, and this was for funds to update Butte-Silver Community Wildfire Protection Plan. And part of this process was then to identify key members of the community, county staff, emergency preparedness, U.S. Forest Service, firefighters, to serve as core team members to provide advice and guidance throughout the process and development of the Community Wildfire Protection Plan, the CWPP. And at points in the last year, the core team was meeting every other week to learn, understand, and make decisions on elements of the CWPP that you'll hear about in a minute. It was a big effort, and we'd like to thank them for that work. We'd also like to thank the DNRC staff and acknowledge the grant funds, and in particular, the expertise that the DNRC staff provided to the core team throughout this process. So with that, let's go ahead and go through the plan and the public input and hear about what the public input process is from here on out.
Before we get started, we are going to provide a quick overview of Microsoft Teams for the public. If you look to the top of your screen, you should see a ribbon with several tabs, including Q&A and your camera and microphone status. The main tab you will want to pay attention to is the Q&A tab. If you click this, you will open a small window where you can submit questions or comments. A moderator will review your submission before it is published on the Q&A tab. Please be respectful. Any inappropriate or offensive comments will not be published or addressed during this meeting. The moderator will group questions according to similar themes or topics, and these will be addressed during the Q&A session at the end of the meeting. Feel free to submit throughout the meeting or at the end during the Q&A session. Also, you may notice that your camera and microphone have been turned off. This is an automatic setting for this public meeting in order to facilitate an organized and timely presentation. The focus of tonight's meeting will be to provide an overview of the Draft Community Wildfire Protection Plan, or CWPP. Following this presentation, we will facilitate a 20-minute Q&A session during which members of the core team will answer the questions submitted throughout the presentation. As Mila mentioned at the beginning of the meeting, the CWPP update has been driven by the interdisciplinary core team, which is comprised of representatives from the City and County of Butte-Silver Bow, MTDNRC, the U.S. Forest Service, and environmental consulting firm DJ&A. This core team has been meeting regularly since February of 2023 to collaborate on the development of the updated CWPP. Their dedication to collaboration throughout this process is evidenced by the comprehensive document we are here to discuss today. To give us all a roadmap of what will be covered in this presentation, we will first provide a general overview of Community Wildfire Protection Plans, or CWPPs, and then move into the specifics of the updated CWPP, touching on the Wildland-Urban Interface, or WUI, risk assessment, priority areas, recommendations for the treatment of structural ignitability, and implementation. We will then highlight a few important dates, go over how to submit public comments on the draft CWPP, and conclude with a Q&A session. The concept of CWPPs was first introduced by the Healthy Forest Restoration Act of 2003, or HIFRA, which contains a variety of provisions aimed at streamlining the preparation and implementation of fuels reduction projects, particularly those in close proximity to communities and essential community infrastructure. Among these provisions, HIFRA emphasizes the development of CWPPs in order to help communities plan for, respond to, and recover from wildfire events. HIFRA outlines three minimum requirements for a valid CWPP. These are collaboration, prioritized fuel reduction, and recommendations for the treatment of structural ignitability. These requirements mean that a CWPP must be collaboratively developed by local and state government representatives in consultation with federal agencies and other interested stakeholders. The CWPP must identify and prioritize areas for hazardous fuel reduction treatments and recommend the types and methods of treatment that will protect at-risk communities and essential infrastructure. And the CWPP must recommend measures that homeowners and communities can take to reduce wildfire risks to structures. Once completed, the CWPP must be approved by the applicable local government, local fire department, and the state entity responsible for forest management. An updated CWPP facilitates access to numerous funding sources intended to improve wildfire response and reduce wildfire risk. State and federal guidance recommends that CWPPs be updated every 5 to 10 years. The prior CWPP for the city and county of Butte-Silver is now almost 18 years old, was based on now outdated science and methodologies, and is currently inadequate to address current conditions and needs throughout the county. Without an updated CWPP, a community may not have an accurate understanding of their current wildfire risk and may not have a strategy for reducing wildfire risk that is aligned with that community's values. An updated CWPP is an invaluable tool that empowers communities to effectively strategize and plan for wildfire events. First, CWPPs provide a mechanism for local communities to interpret wildfire risk and delineate a WUI that reflects local concerns, assets, and resources, while also aligning with current federal and state policies and guidance. By delineating a robust WUI, certain federal projects within the WUI can qualify for streamlined NEPA processes. An updated CWPP also allows communities to map priority areas within the WUI and beyond for future projects based on the unique values, needs, and characteristics of the area. Delineating priority areas and projects within the CWPP also facilitates access to numerous grant opportunities intended to reduce the risk and consequence of wildfire events. With that overview of the purpose and need for CWPPs in mind, we will move into a summary of the updates made to the CWPP. During this summary, we will focus on the WUI, priority areas, and implementation. We encourage the public to review the full draft CWPP document to learn more. You can find the draft CWPP through the online story map, for which a link and QR code are provided in this presentation. You can also access the story map through the Butte-Silver website under the Wildfire Prevention, Preparedness, and Post-Fire Recovery Information section. An important component of the updated CWPP is the newly published online story map. This website will serve as a centralized location for all CWPP information, including the current CWPP document, maps, meeting notes and materials, public engagement opportunities, and contact information. As mentioned previously, you can access this website either by using the URL listed on this slide or by scanning the QR code. Once you navigate to the online story map, it should look like this. As you scroll through the windows underneath each tab, you can review various resources published throughout the update process, such as meeting recordings, presentations, and documents. Here we can see the draft CWPP as well as other community engagement documents. This website is intended to be continuously updated as new information becomes available, such as new versions of the CWPP, maps, resources, and more. Once the update is finalized, an interactive mapping application illustrating spatial data developed for the CWPP will be available here as well. Next, we will discuss updates made to the Wildland Urban Interface, or WUI. Delineating the WUI is an integral component of any CWPP and is best accomplished through thoughtful collaboration and coordination with local, state, and federal stakeholders. Though there are many different definitions and ideas of what the WUI actually is, for the purpose of CWPPs, the WUI should be delineated in accordance with the definition set forth in HIFRA. The HIFRA WUI definition is based on proximity to at-risk communities, steep slopes that may affect fire behavior, evacuation routes, geographic features that may aid in creating an effective fire break, such as roads or ridges, and lands identified as Condition Class 3 as documented by the Secretary in a project-specific environmental analysis. Lands designated as Condition Class 3 indicate ecosystems with a high departure from reference conditions in terms of fire regime and associated vegetation. In many cases, these lands are characterized by long-term fire exclusion, which has resulted in a buildup of fuels which compound wildfire risk. Though the WUI must be rooted in the HIFRA definition, exceptions can be made if there is convincing and relevant rationale for including areas beyond the HIFRA WUI, particularly if the consequences of wildfire within said areas would negatively impact at-risk communities. While delineating the WUI, it is also important to clearly document the analysis methodology used to map the WUI within a given area. This ensures that future updates to the WUI are standardized and reproducible. Since 2005, guidance regarding how to delineate the WUI has changed, and new data and analyses have been made available which help to more accurately delineate the WUI across a given area. The WUI delineated in 2005 was based on nationally mapped WUI according to a definition found in the Federal Register. This data layer is generally coarse and includes the categories of interface and intermix, and does not align with the HIFRA definition of WUI directly, though some overlap does occur. This base data layer was then assigned a 4-mile buffer. Primary and secondary highways, some subdivision roads, and high voltage power lines were also included and assigned respective buffers. The updated WUI aligns with the HIFRA WUI definition, conforming with federal and state guidance. This WUI also includes the entirety of 5 municipal watersheds based on elevated wildfire risk and high potential consequences for at-risk communities if a wildfire event were to occur. You'll notice that the general extent of the two WUI polygons are similar, though the updated WUI reflects finer spatial data and covers less area overall. Detailed maps of the WUI can be found in the appendices section of the draft CWPP. The updated WUI was developed by starting with a data layer developed by MTDNRC and Pyrologics, called the functional WUI. This data layer maps the WUI where structures meet or intermingle with undeveloped wildland vegetation and consists of 6 attributes: direct, indirect, and limited exposure, critical fireshed, non-burnable fireshed, and water. The 3 exposure attributes relates to how close a structure is to burnable land cover or fuels. Depending on the level of exposure, different home hardening measures or treatments to reduce structural ignitability are recommended by the MTDNRC. Directly exposed structures are those which could benefit from home hardening to resist ignition and the reduction of fuels within the home ignition zones to reduce the structure's exposure to heat and embers. Indirectly exposed structures are recommended to implement home hardening to resist ignition from embers and nearby structures. All lands further than 1 mile from a group of structures are considered to be non-WUI within this data layer. In addition to the functional WUI layer, the updated WUI also includes 5 municipal watersheds within Silver County. These consist of the Big Hole, Divide Creek, Basin Creek, Mammoth Creek, and Molten Creek watersheds where they occur within the boundaries of Silver County. Together, these 2 data layers form the complete updated WUI for Silver County. The inclusion of these municipal watersheds within the WUI is based on a risk assessment conducted specifically within these areas, which shows that all municipal watersheds have elevated overall conditional wildfire risk, ranging from generally moderate to very high. The 67,000 forested acres represented by these watersheds are the sole sources of water upon which the community depends. Many communities within Silver County are dependent on water sourced from watersheds distant from the city's urban limits and are subsequently vulnerable to wildfire events occurring within these watersheds. Over time, these watersheds have become increasingly susceptible to impacts from wildfire due to declining forest health and a buildup of fuels, which increases the potential for high severity wildfire events. Wildland fire can reduce soil stability and have devastating effects on municipal watersheds due to contamination from sedimentation and erosion. Water treatment operators estimate that a high-severity wildland fire event within these watersheds could lead to tens of millions of dollars in infrastructure damage and ultimately render critical components of the drinking water supply system inoperable for up to a decade or more. Currently, projects are being developed and implemented to address this high-priority issue, such as the Basin Creek Butte Watershed Project. Moving into risk assessment, we will provide an overview of how wildfire risk data was interpreted across the county and incorporated into the CWPP. The Montana Wildfire Risk Assessment was published in 2020 by MTDNRC and Pyrologics. This quantitative analysis considers the likelihood of a fire occurring, the intensity of a fire if it were to occur, exposure of assets and resources, and the susceptibility of those assets and resources to wildfire. This report and associated data provide a comprehensive picture of wildfire risk across the state, including current and potential wildfire risk metrics. The findings of this risk assessment are critically important for the planning, prioritization, and implementation of prevention and mitigation activities and can also be used to support fire response operations by identifying susceptible assets and resources. The updated CWPP has incorporated these data into WUI delineation and the mapping of priority areas. The Montana Wildfire Risk Assessment generated multiple data layers and metrics that relate to wildfire risk across the state. Of these data, the core team identified three metrics as the most useful for characterizing wildfire risk within the county. These include wildfire risk, ENVC, conditional risk, CNVC, and risk to potential structures, RPS. The wildfire risk layer quantifies wildfire risk by considering the likelihood of a fire larger than 250 acres occurring on the landscape, the likelihood of associated fire intensities, and the susceptibility of mapped assets and resources to wildfire of different intensities. The anticipated response of these assets and resources is then translated into a measure of total wildfire risk across the county as it relates to these identified assets and resources. The conditional risk layer serves to characterize the consequence of a wildfire by incorporating the exposure of a mapped asset or resource and integrating its predicted response to wildfire, which can range from negative or detrimental to neutral. By predicting response, this layer provides context for the consequences that a wildfire event would have if it were to occur in a given area. The risk to potential structures layer represents the potential consequences across every point on the landscape if a home were present and if a wildfire were to occur. This is useful for anticipating potential development and associated wildfire risk. Next, we will discuss how the updated CWPP maps priority areas across the county and the benefit of doing so. FIPR requires that CWPPs prioritize areas for wildfire risk and/or fuel reduction. Identifying priority areas within the CWPP also serves to enable communities to access grant funding, such as the Community Wildfire Defense Grant Program, or CWDG, administered by the U.S. Forest Service. Mapping these areas also provides land managers with a clear representation of priority areas across the county, which can help to facilitate informed management decisions. Priority areas that are mapped outside of the WUI are still eligible to receive the CWDG grant, among others, but they cannot use the streamlined NEPA processes that projects located within the WUI are eligible to use. The figure shown here illustrates a heat map of increasing prioritization, with darker red representing higher priority areas. You can find a detailed version of this map within the appendices section of the draft CWPP. To create the overall priority areas map shown in the previous slide, the core team developed a list of priority elements and sub-elements. These elements were identified through collaboration with the core team to identify spatial data sources and categories that corresponded to the local values and needs of Silverbow County. Once these priority elements were finalized, the core team ranked them in order of increasing relative importance and grouped them according to low, moderate, and high categories. The ranking number for each priority element was then assigned a corresponding shade of red, with darker red indicating the highest rank, as illustrated by the graphic on this slide. By stacking all of the priority element layers within a single map, a comprehensive heat map of priority areas was generated. This approach allows land managers to utilize this data layer to identify the overall prioritization rank for a potential project area, while also identifying the different priority elements that comprise that ranking. Individual maps showing each priority element and its respective sub-elements is included within the appendices section of the draft CWPP. The core team identified and ranked 16 priority elements and their respective sub-elements. These elements are described in detail within the draft CWPP and are represented in corresponding maps within the appendices section. For an example of how the individual priority elements were mapped across the county, you can see here how overlapping polygons create darker areas, reflecting that location's higher priority status. The figures shown here represent critical infrastructure and utilities, the Montana Forest Action Plan priority areas for focused attention, and the wildfire risk priority element, which is composed of portions of elevated wildfire risk in close proximity to structures. A detailed overview of the prioritization process and rankings for each priority element can be found within the appendices section of the draft CWPP. As a required component of the CWPP, recommendations for the treatment of structural ignitability are included within the updated plan. These recommendations are extensive and can vary according to the exposure of the structure, as was discussed for the WILI earlier. An overview of these recommendations is included within the CWPP, along with helpful links to connect the public with existing programs and resources that help communities live with fire. The topics covered within this section of the CWPP also include homeowner resources, grants and funding, and education and outreach. To conclude, we will discuss how the CWPP will be implemented moving forward. In order to effectively implement the CWPP, the core team developed an implementation plan consisting of clearly defined goals, objectives, and strategies that will help to guide the CWPP and future updates. In addition to the implementation plan, the core team also collaborated to identify ongoing and proposed projects that align with the CWPP's goals by creating an action plan. The action plan lists all ongoing and proposed projects, assigns primary responsibilities, and identifies timeframes if possible. As a living document, the CWPP is designed to be continually updated as new information becomes available and progress is made towards the goals outlined within the implementation plan. Over time, new goals, objectives, strategies, and projects will be added to the document. A full CWPP update should occur every 5 to 10 years in order to ensure that the community can access funding to implement these projects. Both the implementation and action plans can be found as appendices to the draft CWPP. Now that we have given an overview of the updates made to the CWPP, we want to highlight a few important dates. Tonight's virtual public meeting marks the last public meeting for the CWPP update process, but the public comment period for the draft CWPP will remain active until January 21st, 2024. After that date, the core team will incorporate public comments, final revisions, and obtain signatures for the final version of the CWPP, which is anticipated to be published in February of 2024. We encourage all members of the public to engage with this update process by submitting a public comment regarding the draft CWPP. All you have to do is visit the story map, review the draft CWPP, and email your written comment to bsbcwpp@bsb.mt.gov on or before January 21st, 2024. If your comment references a specific location within the draft CWPP, we ask that you include a page number. With that, we will now begin the Q&A portion of this meeting. Our moderator has been collecting questions and comments from the Q&A tab and has grouped them by similar themes or topics, which we will now address.
Great. Thank you. Well, at this point in time, I don't see any questions in the Q&A section, but just want to give it a minute to see if there are any additional or any questions or any hands raised. I mean, I don't think we can raise our hands. Yeah, any questions entered into the Q&A panel? Excellent. Well, not seeing any questions at this point, I think we will remind everyone again that the recording will be posted on the story map, and the public comment period extends through January 21st. And at this point, I think we can close our meeting. Thank you.
Thank you. Great job.
Yeah, thank you. Excellent job.